Hello, everyone. It's noon Central European Time, 1 p.m. here in Finland, and it's time for Manna Insect's monthly Q&A session. My name is Tom. I'm the head of marketing with Manna, and today our specialist is the Manna Insect CEO and founder Marjanen. Now we have a very special topic today, which is the pre and the post-processing equipment and schemes at the starting scale. Now, of course, we will cover more widely, generally the pre and post processing equipment and schemes, but especially if you're just about to start and need to figure out which kind of equipment you need and what kind of pre and post processing do you need to do, especially with the substrate and then the ready larva, then this is the right session for you. Feel free to ask questions from the questions or the chat sections. I will read those out loud to Uka. We also have a set of questions that has been collected from our other sessions, as well as frequently asked questions from our business development, and there will be a recording made for those that are not able to join this session live. The recording, as well as other recordings, will be found at the Insect Farm Hub. The insectfarmhub.com hosts all the webinar recordings, podcast episodes that have been published, and so forth, and lots of other, of course, learning material, as well as an AI mentor and other stuff that you probably are hopefully already familiar with. You should check it out, and the session will be uploaded there within the next couple of days or so. It is the May 1st holiday here in Finland, as well as in many other countries, and because of that, it may take a couple of days to get the recording uploaded to the Insect Farm Hub. Now, let's get started. First of all, welcome and use the chat and question sections. But Uka, are you ready to take on the topic?
Yes. Hi, Tom, and everyone. Like
Excellent.
always.
Shall we start with a question, first of all, regarding the pre-processing of larvae as well as the substrate? What needs to be done before the actual rearing can be started? What kind of processing does the substrate need? First of all, substrate in this case meaning the food or organic waste that is being fed to the larvae, and let's separate the question regarding the pre-processing of larvae perhaps until later. But let's start with the substrate. What needs to be done for it to be uh, easily fed to the larvae?
Yes, this is the one thing that I think separates other animal growing from BSF, and even if you're growing insects uh, from BSF from the other insects, is that the whole idea of BSF is, and the using this species, is that you can feed practically anything. You can use what we would call bio waste or discarded food or unused side streams, byproducts, and so on. And the the advantage, of course, is that now you have a lot of options. The disadvantage is that now you cannot we cannot formulate a like commercial recipe like for chickens and fish and so on that everyone can use, and then you can just buy it exactly right. So the pre-processing also cannot be standardized, but there are very, let's say, universal, um, let's say, principles what you should aim at. And from this, the idea is that for larvae, you should look at from the larvae's perspective. How do you make the substrate what you want to feed for the larvae to be as optimal as possible? And it really comes down to um, a few things. Like if let's say you cannot really choose or control the nutritional value of the substrate, what you can control is the format it is given to the larvae. And for that, there's two critical um, things you need to understand. One is that the larvae are not, they don't have physical teeth or physical way to grind it. They suck the food, and then their stomach pretty much does the work. How they get through a more like a harder shell is like a joint force, like together they're together activating it, and then they have a lot of enzymes and these that kind of process the food, but that takes too long. So what you can do in pre-process is two things. One is that you need to make sure that the substrate is as wet as possible but still has a texture that you can the larvae can actually be on top of it instead of just floating around. And then the other is that you grind it as small as possible. Those are the two kind of key things that you are looking for, regardless are you feeding bananas or hard substrate like potatoes or vegetables, raw vegetables, and these kind of things. So that's kind of the principle where you start. And unfortunately, in many cases, you need to test the different ways to grind it before you can really get to the, let's say, conclusion what is good. But the good news is that you can start relatively simple at the beginning, because eventually they will eat, but it will just take longer. And then the job of the pre-processing is to convert that biowaste into the most optimal substrate format for the larvae with minimal amount of time and investment. That's basically the kind of formula that you're constantly optimizing.
Okay. In regards to the substrate, there's a lot of discussion online whether the substrate should be fermented before it's being fed to the larvae. Now, what does fermentation mean, and is it beneficial or required as sort of a pre-processing phase of the farming?
Well, my understanding with fermentation is that what you're basically doing is allowing bacteria um, to do work before the larvae, and the bacteria will kind of make it easier for the larvae to consume the nutrition. So so it is kind of like almost feeding it to another animal or biological entity before you feed it to larvae. And it's very hard to say. Um, let's put it this way: it is a lot of work. It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of space, because fermentation doesn't happen in hours or days. So I think at that point, you should know how good was the result without fermentation, and then does the fermentation really add value? Either that it really, doubles the size of the larvae, or it halvens the growth period. So I would say that it's part of the tool pack of pre-processing, but I would consider it to be like on the later stage, or on the kind of like backup plan or plan B or C, um, if just grinding and mixing doesn't work for some reason, and that you don't have any other bio-waste sources to have.
Okay. Can you, in short, explain a little bit the recipe making? So, what does a substrate recipe really mean, and why is that important for the process?
So your job, the larvae, of course, are a little bit like, if we try to have an analogy to chickens, let's say, the what you're doing is that you have a recipe of how much food, what type of nutrition, what is the best format that you can grow one chicken to a maximum size with the shortest amount of time. Now, the big difference with the larvae is that A, like I said earlier, you're not feeding commercially grinded, optimized feed. But the other is that these larvae don't eat like individually. You cannot feed them individually. They feed together in the bin, let's say a tray. So in this case, what recipe means is that because you cannot look at individual larvae, you're basically looking a group of larvae, and you are assessing the triangle of how many larvae, how many kilos of substrate, and then how long does it take. So this is kind of the principle of the recipe. Like the simplest version of the recipe is that I will put this substrate at this wetness level, let's say 8 kilos, in a tray where I put 10,000 larvae, and I'm expecting that they will eat that substrate in 10 days. And that's kind of the core part of the recipe. Uh, it could be as simple as just a weight, 8 kilos of substrate, assuming that the substrate is certain wetness. And then you're experimenting with the amount of substrate compared to the amount of larvae compared to the time. Of course, you put more larvae, you get faster time that they eat, but they're going to be smaller larvae. So that's kind of like the recipe making principle. Then on top of that comes more advanced and kind of details on the like is 32 Celsius better than 28 Celsius and the electricity cost and all that. But that's kind of like that's already kind of like a second level.
All right. What about the schedule then? If we think that, first of all, you collect the eggs or you buy the eggs, and then to the moment when you're ready to set the larvae on top of the food, what happens in between and long does it take? I mean, there's a lot of talk about hatching and stuff. What's the sort of in short the practice from eggs to actually producing?
Yeah, I mean we're roughly talking 2 weeks, like 14 days plus minus 2, 3 days. The but there's variability depending on if let's say you have that your side stream is expensive, that either there's very little of it and you want to kind of maximize the nutritional value out of it, or that it just costs too much, then you would let's say compromise and let the larvae eat longer so that you can kind of extract everything out of them and make the larvae as big as possible. So then you can be like 18 days, let's say. Or then you have the other side where you have abundant amount of eggs and larvae, but then and also the bio waste, and you're kind of doing more like a bio waste management. You want to get as much as possible rid of the bio waste. Then you just put more larvae, and then your growth time is faster, and you can even harvest them at age 12. But let's say on average is that you it takes them 2 to 3 days to hatch from eggs, and then you on average nurse them 5 days, but of course because they hatch different times, they're kind of like 5 day olds plus minus 1 day, but we just call them 5 day olds. So you put the eggs hatching day 1 or day 0, day 5 you collect them, they're 5 day olds on average, and then I would say 8 days growth period is a typical. So that, let's say 13, 14 days is that what you're aiming at. And again, that's something that we instruct, that if the growth period alone takes more than 14 days, then your recipe is not good enough economically. So that's kind of like one criteria. If they start to be over 20 days, the whole process, it's too long.
All right, excellent. Regarding the pre-processing equipment, so if you need to grind your potatoes to smaller pieces or do other kind of pre-preparation for the substrate, what are the typical equipment used or generally needed in order to get started?
Like because like I would, as we are like as an industry very young, and there's very few specialized equipment pre-processing for BSF, and I personally don't think that those are even needed. What you're looking for is from other industries, food industries mainly, like grinders for apples, potatoes, vegetables in general. They're pretty much what you're looking for, because that's what you're kind of grinding anyway. The other thing what we did was that initially we bought these very miniature size, like consumer um, milkshakers and these kind of things that you can shake and you can chop different kind of vegetables and food. And this also comes down to where there's a big difference within the BSF industry of like two camps almost. There's the big camp with these big facilities, production units, and factories. And what they normally do is that they get spent grain and very dry matter that is very high quality. So their pre-processing will be totally different than for what we are more advocating, and let's say our audience is more is like small scale farmers where you don't have a big facility and you just want to get municipal heterogeneous waste. So, like a grinder mixer that is used in waste management or these in a small scale is good. They start like I think a couple $100. You can get those that are manual. Then there are these like a faster cycling that basically are like wood chippers that you just put it through and it just sprouts the stuff out from the other end in million pieces. So it's kind of a challenge, and we are building like a material and list of equipment and these in the insect farm hub because of this as well. But you should looking for let's say start with like what would you do to make apple juice from apples? How do you grind it and those kind of equipment? That's a good place to start.
Um, and this is general hardware store stuff, or would you recommend using I don't know, Alibaba, or are they available on Amazon? Are there special brands that you could sort of you think would be better than others, or is it just generally eh, dependent on the equipment name or size? As long as it can do the job, that's good enough.
Yeah, I mean, these are very standardized equipment, and there are a million brands using it, depending if you're a consumer, pro consumer, or like a small farmer. And then, of course, factory level and all that. But in your case, and in our case, like micro and small scale, the Amazon or Jumia or Alibaba are very good starting points, and India and at the range of $200 to $400 versions that, because again, like I said in the earlier, the problem is that you have to kind of um, build your farm and design the process to accept almost any kind of mixed heterogeneous size streams for you to be successful. So that means that you just have to have a few different equipment that you can crush and mix as many ways as possible. And so initially, just buy the cheapest equipment to just test and get a sense of what is good enough. And then when you get bigger quantities, you can look for the equivalent bigger size equipment.
And the same likely applies to the post-processing equipment. What kind of equipment is needed there? We've seen funny videos from sieving machines online and stuff. What is the sort of a post-processing equipment that is absolutely necessary, and what would be sort of nice to have?
Yeah, actually, post processing in certain ways it's harder, but from the selection of equipment, it's actually easier. You can get away, like the other aspect is that as long as you're basically, I mean, live larvae, that's a very local product. Um, the whole dried larvae is basically probably the most optimal product. It's still very straightforward to do post processing cost effectively, but you can still store it, and there's room to do many things after that. So I would say what you need is a boiler where I don't know, like a 20-liter kettle where you can dip the live larvae with like you've sieved the larvae and the frass as much as mechanically possible. So you need like a vibrating sieve or similar. And then the next the step is that you dip the larvae in a boiling water, which will clean them more. They will extricate their bowel and they will die. And it's like a hygienic process as well. That's like 5 minutes in a boiling water. Then the next step after that is if you want to make whole dried larvae the fastest, it's basically air fryer, 200 Celsius for 15 minutes. And you can get like $100 air fryer, 10-liter air fryer, and you can do 500-gram batches in every 10 minutes. And those have looked very well, and it's been easy, and we've used them practice, and we've seen customers using them. After that, if you want to defat, that's where it gets a little bit tricky because defatting is not just oil press; it's oil press with certain temperature, pressure, and these, and those are like then start to be like $2,000, $3,000 to get to that level. But so I would kind of resist and just start with whole dried larvae before you're ready to invest, let's say around $50,000 to the post processing. So there's this big gap between up to a whole dried larvae. You can do it very easily with less than $1,000 initial budget. But if you then go to defatting, you're kind of quickly to $5,000, and you may have like a rotating air drum dryers. And then from there, like if you want to do it really professionally, it kind of jumps into $30,000, $40,000. So that's kind of the challenge of the post processing. But I don't like I've seen many good products and many customers in demand for the whole dried larvae.
And with sort of further you go from the actual rearing into ready-made products, then you would probably have to spend much more money on oil pressers or whatnot, right? So it's related closely to the level of sort of what you're trying to make out of a larva.
Yeah, and it's not evident, and let's say no one has proven me yet that the further you go from whole dried larvae, add more post processing, more capex, more effort, more energy to the post processing, that you are able to get the higher value and price so that you can make at least the same profit margin, if not, of course, more by making it more post processed. So that's kind of the thing is that at least if you're thinking feeding it to chickens, anything beyond live larvae is not easier for the chicken. The chicken loves live larvae. The only thing you're doing after the live larvae is basically just making it easier to transport and let's say automate the feeding to more chickens. But the live larvae from chickens' perspective is already perfect. So I think that's kind of the mystic about post processing, and something that is not really talked about is that the more you post process, it looks like now that you're not getting more value, you're just getting less profit margin, and you're kind of forced into doing the post processing further. Not that you would do it because you want to get better profit.
So basically, the less capital investment you have on the heavy machinery, the better, right?
Yeah, and unless you're willing to put a couple $100,000, that you're like a one man farming, which is the normal on any animal growing, um, you just stop with the whole dried larvae. It's not worth it going further. So far, no one has shown, even with millions of dollars invested, that their product has been more, let's say, killer in the market and competitive because it has gone through more post processing. I know many like 10 plus $1 million factories that have gone backwards to wet rendered larvae because it provides better profit and value than all the way to like 60% protein BSF meal. defatted with less than 10% protein and water content.
Can we demystify a little bit uh, the discussion that's sort of going forward? And I think you kind of touched the base a little bit, saying that there are different approaches. But what's the use and sort of what would be the need for industrial automation or robotic arms or whatever? I mean these heavy machines in bigger factories, are they worth the investment, and what's the sort of use?
I think, I mean, automation, if you're going to the size of the factories that there are examples in the BSF industry as well, yeah, I mean, yes, you cannot do them without automation. It's impossible um, in practice. But the automation is not, it's kind of, the problem hasn't been the automation part, it's been the assumption that you need to do, and it's only possible to get money if you're going to do tens of thousands of tons in one place. I- and that assumption has kind of led to automation, because of course, if you're going to do tens of thousands in one place, you need practically automation. But it has kind of fell apart when looking at that, what is the substrate for tens of thousands of tons, and that substrate is logistically expensive and has to be homogeneous because of the automation and everything, and that has kind of taken the rug out of actually making BSF end product competitive on price and functionality. So, so the whole fact that we are using BSF because we want to upcycle bio-waste and materials that are, let's say, a problem, doesn't really fit the model inherently that you can do tens of thousands of tons in one location, like a paper machine factory or paper mill or these kind of things. And if you look at animal growing in general, there's no 10 million plus chicken factories where everything's automated either, in that sense. So I think that's kind of like the automation discussion is kind of like distraction from the true original problem of these large scale factories.
Excellent. Now, in regards to the sort of whole value chain here, um, there is, of course, there are options for different kinds of equipment and we sort of managing the whole process. But in short, if you put this all together, I mean, what is the sort of cost structure that you need to have, or sort of like funding you need to have in place in order to acquire the necessary pre-processing equipment, then managing the farm, or sort of like a production unit setup, and then the post-processing. What is the what kind of money are we talking about here? Are we talking about thousands or hundreds of thousands or millions, or where we're at?
Yeah, actually, that's that's something that we get a lot. Is kind of like, I have $2,000. What can I do? And the real question you should first ask is that, how much money do I need to make? Like, I want to be a farmer. I want to make income out of that so that I can dedicate my full time on insect farming, and I'm not gonna spend time. I don't need to do a side job because I don't get enough money or not at all money from the insect farming. That's the first question. If and and now it kind of goes hand in hand on what do you want from income, is that what is your capex at the beginning. So if, let's say that if you are in more developing country, let's say $500 a month is a good earning. Now let's go backwards from that. $500 a month basically means that if you're selling whole dried larvae and you're selling whole dried larvae to, let's say, smaller quantities to backyard chicken hobbyist or someone as a kind of like a snack to chickens, not their main food, but a snack. You can, let's say, sell it for $5 a kilo, whole dried larvae. So you need to sell 100 kilos to get $500 revenue, but of course that's not your profit. So you need to sell about 200 kilos. So now you have a goal, 200 kilos of whole dried larvae a month. That means 600 kilos of live larvae a month. And that means 150 kilos of live larvae per week, because that's your growth cycle. And now with that setup and that the fact that you have 8 hours per day to do all these things, now you can start looking at, okay, what capacity equipment you can have. And in this context, what I just explained, we're talking an investment range of two to let's say $4,000. So a couple $1,000, you can produce 200 kilos of whole dried larvae and get about $1,000 revenue and pay $500 for yourself. Now you can basically extrapolate from there is that if you want to make $5,000 a month, it's not completely linear, but you could say that you need about $15,000 to $20,000 initial investment to get the level of equipment that you alone. That's the thing you have. It's one person, 8 hours a day. That's kind of the fixed variable. And then each question is that, okay, the more money you invest into the equipment, the more you can do with your time to get the output. It's not linear, but we're talking starting costs, I would say, let's put it easy, $3,000 to get to $500 monthly income, and then $30,000 to get to $5,000 monthly income. I think that's a pretty good ballpark to get a sense of what does that actually mean in practice. And let's say if you have a building already, insulated room or something, you can deduct something out of that budget.
All right, excellent. I think we've covered just about all questions that we have so far, and for that, I think if you want to still have some final words or final thoughts about especially the starting scale, so where should you start? You already explained the sort of like approach that from goal setting into actually then figuring out the whole thing. But any final words for starters?
Well, I actually want to emphasize the last point in the sense is that we have these telcos, we have these webinars, we talk about certain equipment, certain budget, and all that, and that's kind of like wrong. It's kind of like a bottom up, where in this case the everything will depend on like what is your ambition level, and then how much money you can put, and then you have to kind of see that, okay, at this level this is what I should expect to get out of it. And then all these equipment you can buy on very different levels. I mean, it's almost like, I mean, it's pretty much like chicken farming. You don't go in chicken farming if you have nothing. You don't go to someone and say, okay, how much does it cost to become a chicken farmer? The first thing they will say that, okay, tell me how many chickens do you want to do? What is your kind of revenue target? And then because you can spend $2,000 or 2 million in a chicken farm, depending on how big you want it to. And it should be the same in BSF. So all these, let's say, equipment and pre-processing and post-processing and all that, it's very hard to give very specific advice before we have a clear goal is what we are aiming at. And you should kind of figure that out, in that sense, is that what is the income that you're happy that you can kind of work on it full time and continuously develop your farm.
All right, excellent advice. Thank you, Uka. Thanks everyone for joining, and feel free to get in touch with us through the contact form at the Manna Insect website or the contact us section from the Insect Farm Hub. Check out the recordings, join the live sessions with our experts, the Q&A sessions as well as the pro and free webinars, and generally take advantage of all the free and useful stuff at the Insect Farm Hub. Thanks for joining, and talk to you again in a couple of weeks. See you. Bye.
Yeah. Bye.